James's final example comes from the story of Job. You may have heard of Job. You may be familiar with his story. It's a fascinating story in the Old Testament. And this morning we're going to look at Job more closely, maybe with some fresh eyes. You may have heard this story before, or maybe you haven't heard it at all. You're going to hear it for the first time. So we're going to look into this example because I think there's a big reason why James threw Job in here as an example of how to endure patience, or how to have patience while we suffer. So the story of Job begins with a statement that Job was a righteous, upright man who was blameless. He feared God. He turned away from evil. Job was incredibly successful. He was wealthy. He had his own business. The book of Job says that he was the greatest man in all the East. Job had 10 children, 3 daughters, and 7 sons. We're told that Job had 5,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 oxen, and 500 donkeys. That's a lot of donkeys. Job was successful. He had a great business going. He was married, had kids. But then we're told this scene is going on in heaven. We're brought up into heaven. And here we're told that God is sitting on his throne. And all the angels are before God at his throne, including Satan, because Satan's a fallen angel. And God says to Satan, he says, "Satan, have you considered my servant Job? He is upright and blameless. He fears me. No one is like him." And Satan says, "Well, of course I've considered your servant Job, God. If I could have him bow down and worship me, he'd be my greatest trophy. But you put this hedge around him. I can't even get to him. You protect him so much. Of course he's not going to curse you, God. I can't even tempt him. But if you let me take everything away from him, I guarantee he will curse you." And I wonder if God paused for a second, considering the options. He finally said, "Fine. You can go and take everything away from Job, but don't you dare touch him. Don't you dare touch a hair on his head. That is not your responsibility. Only I can choose when Job dies. But go, get out of my sight." So Satan comes back down to earth, and we're told Job is out in the fields one day. And his servant runs up to him and he says, "Job, boss, something horrible has happened. Those Chaldeans, they came in. They took all of our oxen and all of our donkeys, and they killed all of your servants." I'm sure Job is getting pretty miffed here. That's a big portion of his business gone, just like that, stolen from him. Then another servant comes. He says, "Job, boss, horrible news. We were out in the fields with your sheep, and I don't know what it was, but this fire started raining down from heaven. It burned alive all of your sheep and all of your servants. I'm the only one who got away." What's going on here? Job's probably thinking, is this a cycle? Another servant comes. "Job, horrible news. The Sabaeans, they came. They took all of our camels, our transportation. I'm the only one who survived." You ever had one of those days where things just keep getting worse and worse and worse? That's what Job was experiencing. In a second, Job lost everything. He lost his business, something he worked very hard for, his reputation, his ability to make a living. All of his financial resources gone like that. No explanation. But one more servant came. The servant came to Job, probably out of breath, saying, "Boss, I have some horrible news." I'm sure at this point Job is thinking to himself, what can be any worse? "Job, I was at the home of your eldest son. He was having one of his parties. One of his parties where all of your children come and eat and drink and have a good time. Well, while I was there, this storm came that I've never seen before, a storm like a hurricane. It started to shake the 4 corners of the house. Job, I'm the only one who got out." "What do you mean you're the only one who got out?" "Job, your children, they're all dead. The house came down on them. Your servants, gone." At this, we're told Job tore his clothes and shaved his head. And he said, "Naked I came into this world, and naked I will return." And he said this wonderful line, "Blessed be the name of the Lord." We're taken back up into heaven. It's round 2. Satan's there with all the angels. And God says to Satan again, "Satan, have you considered my servant Job? He's blameless and upright. He fears me. Have you considered him?" Satan goes, "Listen, of course Job isn't going to curse you. He still has his health. Flesh for flesh. If you let me take his health, I guarantee he will curse you." And God said, "Fine. But don't you dare kill him. That's not for you to decide. Now go. Get out of my sight." So Satan goes back to earth. And we're told that Job is inflicted with these boils, this rash that starts at his heels and ends at the crown of his head. A lot of scholars think that Job actually had a case of hookworms, believe it or not. And they take that from Job 5, where Job says, "My skin is festering with worms." Their diagnosis actually makes sense. And the reason being, I had hookworms before. I'll tell you, quick story. I went down to Mexico with my family right out of high school. And I was on the beach one day, and I got back to our cruise ship, and I had this rash that started to break out on my back. And within 24 hours, it was all down my legs, up my back, around my chest, heading towards my face. And friends, it was the worst pain, irritation, itch I've ever had in my life. I mean, it itched so bad I would cut myself. Scabs all over me. And we're told that Job was sitting there scratching himself with a piece of pottery. I can relate to that. That's what I did. It was horrible. You don't sleep. You barely eat. It took a week for 3 doctors and a dermatologist to figure out what I had. I had to get some special medication from Detroit. It was awful. Point being, Job is miserable here. He's lost everything. He's lost his health. He can't even function. He can't sleep. And his wife sees him. And she says, "Job, my husband, I can't stand really to see you like this anymore. Just curse God and die. Just put yourself out of your misery." Now, we tend to think that Satan didn't kill Job's wife as well because she was a nag and a thorn in his side. That's totally false. It was God's grace and God's mercy why she was spared. I think Job's wife was coming at him out of compassion. "Honey, I can't stand to see you like this anymore. For some reason, God has decided to turn his back on you. You've done nothing wrong. You have nothing left. If God is against you, you have nothing. Just curse him and die." But that's not what he does. He says, "Why should I take the good things that God gives me with the bad? Blessed be the name of the Lord." The story continues. Job's friends show up, his good friends. They show up, they see him in the distance sitting there. He looks miserable. And they sit down with him, and they don't say a word to him for 7 days and 7 nights. Can you imagine if you were sick in the hospital, and PG came to you, sat down, and just looked at you for 7 days and 7 nights and didn't say a word? After about 7 minutes, you start to get a little creeped out, wouldn't you? You tell them to say something. "Come on, Pastor Greg. Give me a good word." But they didn't. They sat there for 7 days and 7 nights, and they didn't say a word. I think there's an important truth in that. Sometimes, when we sit with people who are suffering, or experience a loss, or in pain, most of the time the best thing to do is just to sit there. Don't say a thing. A lot of times when we get in those situations, when someone is suffering, we start to get a little anxious. Anxiety starts to build up. We feel like we have to say something profound. And usually it's not very that profound what we say. Sometimes it's best just to sit there. Just be with them in their suffering and in their pain. Well, Job's friends were being good friends until they opened their mouths. They said, "Job, let's figure out what's wrong here. Let's figure out why God is punishing you." "Well, it's obvious, isn't it, Job? You did something wrong.